Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the first High Street Conversations of May. And we're going to be talking about the plan for neighbourhoods. So I know this is something which impacts a lot of members right across the UK, given the importance of this funding programme. And there's been a lot of uncertainty around it. So in July, when we had the installation of a new administration, much of the mantra was about change across society and economy, the plan for change. And indeed, one of the things which was earmarked for change was the long-term plan for towns. Something which was put in place by the previous administration, which the new Labour government weren't content with. And so this was made quite clear very early on. And it was the same with a lot of other funding programs. There has been a pause and a lot of uncertainty in between. And there were fears that with all the financial challenges the UK has, the lasting legacy of debt from COVID, the so-called 22 billion black hole in terms of spending, and even more recently from the challenges from across the pond, which might mean economic problems and also more spending needed in things like defence, real concerns that we would see the scrapping of certain programs and cuts to public spending. And indeed, it has been rumoured, there has been fears that one of the things that might go would be the long-term plan for town. So it wouldn't just be change, but it would be a scrapping altogether by the Chancellor. Now, the indications were from MHCLG is that they always wanted to retain the long-term plan for towns. However, they just weren't happy with it, and so that change would happen. Um, and here's what we think they weren't happy with. I just wonder if there was a little indication of the dissatisfaction around the structure of the funding program as there is dissatisfaction with other funding programs, actually highlighted at our place management conference earlier this year. So, at our conference, A Crisis in Local Government Finance, Dr. Steve Norris from Lambert Smith Hampton joined us, and he outlined some of the challenges with UK government funding programs for town centres, saying that there were a lot of them. They covered different things. There wasn't always clarity on what they covered, and they were quite difficult to work with, meaning that for many of those programs, there was quite a large deal of underspend. What he identified is that one of the key problems was a lack of flexibility in terms of combining funding streams in order to invest in key interventions, even though there might be overlaps in some of the different programs. We're talking long-term plan for towns, UK Shared Prosperity Fund, Levelling Up Fund, Towns Fund, Future High Streets Fund, etc., etc., etc. And the lack of flexibility between them, challenges around steep inflation, how things had changed, it all made it really difficult to work with. And that is something which he had highlighted at that conference. And I don't know how much that conference itself has had an impact on government thinking. Some of you will remember that we had officers from the Treasury that deal with funding programs in the room with us. And probably the thing they were most interested with was this talk from Dr. Steve Norris around how funding programs could be improved. Now, what it does appear is that the new government seems to agree with this analysis in terms of how funding works. So those changes look like they are reflected in the new long-term plan for towns. So there is now much more flexibility in terms of the scope of the programme. And that flexibility includes expanding the designated locations in which the money can be spent. So long-term plan for towns felt to me primarily about being town centres. It is now broader than that in terms of the area the money can be invested in. It sounds to me like there is a broadening of the type of interventions that can be used. So we're not any longer talking about an outputs based approach, but more an outcomes based approach. So to articulate that difference, it might be that when it comes to something like the reduction in crime, long-term plan for towns might stipulate the types of things you can spend money on, be it CCTV, um, radio links, other crime reduction measures. Whereas what it feels like now is there is a move towards saying that reduction of crime is your mission, it's your objective. The types of interventions you spend your money on in order to get there is absolutely your choice. And so it brings into play other options, which might be things like youth engagement, for example, in order to solve the problem. So the scope of the interventions is wider because we're looking at outcomes, not outputs. And then there's greater flexibility in spending rules as well. So it looks like borrowing is going to be allowed against the funding. Underspends will be allowed to be rolled into future years. And also the combining of the funding with pots of money from other funding programs is likely to be allowed as well. So there is a new approach across many of these things. And so with that, the long-term plan for towns is no more. And what we now have now is the plan for neighbourhoods. So it feels like it is more than just a simple rebrand. The substance of the programme is changing. And with that, some of the language changes as well. So it's no longer about town boards. It is now about neighbourhood boards. So again, it feels like a way to broaden that geography in terms of the different use of language. Part of the inspiration for this comes from past programs. So one of the things which the Plan for Neighbourhoods briefing document mentions is how it takes a lot of its learnings from the New Deal for Communities, which was launched in 1998 under the Blair government, looking at 39 deprived locations across England. And again, it was an outcomes-based program where there was a lot of flexibility and scope in terms of the types of interventions that could be brought forward that seemed to deliver a lot of success. So I've been going through the evaluation of that program, which was done by, I think, Sheffield University. And this is one of the quotes from that evaluation. Across the program, the 39 New Deal for Community Partnerships, working in collaboration with other delivery agencies, have been adept in introducing innovative projects to help achieve people-related outcomes. The sheer scale and variety of interventions is impressive, as is the range of organisations with which the New Deal for Communities partnerships have worked. So clearly there is something about providing that flexibility in scope and the variety of interventions that come forward as a result is something which this new administration is interested in. So the report goes on to say there is evidence of absolute change in many people-related outcomes across the 39 areas. Virtually all indicators moved in a positive and often statistically significant manner. Now, one of the things I will say is it was always also picked up in this report that they weren't sure whether the program itself had any real tangible impact on those towns because it was stated that very little of this change was significantly greater than that experienced in the comparator areas or nationally. So basically, there were areas which didn't get funding but still improved regardless. So there are question marks around exactly how successful these interventions were, however good they were. Nevertheless, we have the plan for neighbourhoods now. Some things are not going to change, so some of the basics are going to remain the same. 1.5 billion for 75 areas. Those 75 areas remain exactly the same as under the long-term plan for towns. That's going to be up to around 20 million each over the next decade, which this funding is spread. We have new strategic objectives. So we're looking at the creation of thriving places. We are looking at stronger communities. I think in the briefing document, it mentions specifically the challenges. around social division, polarization, and things like the riots, as reasons why stronger communities are an important objective. And also taking back control, so ensuring people locally can lead on the types of interventions that can be put forward, sort of in the spirit of devolution, which is forthcoming. The funding structure is going to be 75% capital funding, 25% revenue funding. £250,000 should already have been issued to each recipient for the development of the neighbourhood board. Due this financial year, so as of last month, what is due is 200,000 in capacity funding, and then the delivery funding will be due from next financial year. Lead local authorities are being asked to consult with their neighbourhood boards on how the money will be spent. In terms of timeline, everybody should now have data packs from MHCLG, and these should include metrics against the three strategic objectives that have been that should be sent to both local authorities and neighbourhood boards. Um, so you should have those already. The deadline has already passed for notifying MHCLG of any changes to the membership of your board because of the change from town boards to neighbourhood boards, and also changes to boundaries in which the money will be spent. With the broadening of those locations, obviously every area has the ability to change its boundaries. The deadline for that was the 22nd of April. Spring 2025, and I'm a bit dubious about the loose timeline of spring 2025 because I know in civil service world, in civil service speak, spring can last a very, very long time. MHCLG is looking for sign off, obviously sign off on the membership and boundary changes which are submitted, and they will also issue further guidance to funding recipients in devolved nations, and also that capacity funding will be issued as well. So I'll come on to devolved nations in a bit more detail in just a second, because there are some additional things devolved nations will need to take on board. And then between spring and winter 2025, which honestly, guys, in civil service speak, equates to about a whole 12 months. So not very specific, but here we go. Neighbourhood boards must submit regeneration plans to MHCLG for assessment and approval. So I'm not exactly sure exactly when this deadline is going to be. Hopefully MHCLG will come out with a specific date for when this will have to be. But those regeneration plans, I think most people will know, it's a 10-year vision, but a more specific, more detailed investment plan for the first 4 years. So that's what that should look like. So coming on to the devolved nations, another thing that changes between this government and the other is a greater willingness from this government to work more closely with the devolved administrations. And so for those areas outside of England who are in receipt of the funding, the new government is asking those recipients of funding to ensure that their regeneration plans align with the policy objectives of your specific nation. So in Northern Ireland, there is a request that regeneration plans are aligned with the executive programme for government alongside council community plans, local development plans, and other strategies. In Scotland, it's the same alignment with the Scottish Government's regeneration strategy, and also the UK government wants to see those areas liaise with the Scottish Government Regeneration Unit. For Wales, there is a desire to see alignment with the Welsh Programme for Government, the Wellbeing of Future Regenerations, and the Transforming Funds the Transforming Towns programme and the Future Wales Planning Framework. So there needs to be alignment in all those things for those in devolved nations. So my question is while all this change is great, is it all a little bit too late considering how far down the line so many areas had got in putting together their plans, in developing some of the work they were going to do, and um, already developing their partnerships? Some of these partnerships, some of the boards might actually be a legacy from previous funding programs. So, will any of this change now at this late stage actually make a difference? So, for today's conversation, we're going to ask how are local authorities, neighbourhood boards, and others planning on using the money from the plan for neighbourhoods, and have boards and/or regeneration plans actually changed since the rebrand from the long-term plan for towns? Or is it more a case of business as usual? So that's going to be enough from me. What I want to do is I want to hand over to Chesterfield, who are with us today, who, from a recent investment summit I was able to attend, it's quite clear, are doing some excellent work. So, Chesterfield, can I bring you in? And
Of course
I'm
you
going
can.
to stop sharing my screen. There we go. So,
So thank
Neil, do you want to introduce yourself? And Linda, do you want to feel free to get up the slides?
thank you. Good morning, everybody. So my name's Neil Johnson. I'm the Director for Economic Growth at Chesterfield, and the fabulous Linda Sharp is joining me today, and she's our Head of Economic Development. And Linda's going to put the slides up, and I'm going to talk through them, and then we can answer whatever questions you have, as long as they're easy, at the end of that. So what I was going to do in terms of the presentation was just run you through, I suppose, from the beginning, in terms of how it came to be for us, and then what are the implications of any changes that are there as well. So I know, OJ, you've given a lot of this information already. So yes, 75 towns, 20 million over 10 years. That 20 million, actually 75% was capital, 25% was revenue, which in some ways was a bit of an issue in itself, the way that their capital and revenue is decided, because for what is a revenue program, in large part there is capital money. So there is a bit of an issue with that. And that was something we did feed back to government as part of some consultation we had with MHCLG in between them deciding what they were going to do with the program, but no change. We were one of the towns, so we were the only one in Derbyshire. We formed a town board, and that town board, it was fairly representative of health, education, both lower and upper tier authorities, the private sector. We have a strong independent lobby in Chesterfield Town Centre, so that was part of it. Other businesses, and also community and creative, which I think was quite important, and that was really important, I think, in terms of some of the early work we did as well. So we formed the town board with a private sector chair, started meeting in April 24, and we had a program of engagement during that summer. The program, as you're aware, was paused. However, we still went ahead and submitted our vision and investment plan at that time, even though we were advised that we didn't need to do it. We thought, actually, we've done the work, we're going to get it in, just to see where it goes. And, board continued after that to explore themes and projects. However, while that hiatus was there, keeping them on board was a bit of an issue as well, because nobody knew what was going to happen next. And actually, what was the value in still meeting was a question that we had to give ourselves. But I think the way that Linda and I are approaching the town centre in Chesterfield at the moment, and the town centre master plan and framework, what was originally very much a spatial document, has become much more about consultation and working together in partnership in terms of that master plan for the town centre. So certainly a change in terms of that. Thanks, Linda. So we did a quite an extensive exercise, reached almost 2,000 people, mix of online survey and in-person activities. I think one of the benefits of having the town team in place was we were able to utilize community, voluntary sector, creative sector in terms of doing that work. There was a lot of it was quite arts-led sessions, which gets people's creative juices going, and imagination in terms of response. And young people were heavily featured in that. We had a couple of presentations from local schools within that early part of the engagement as well. So it worked really well, and I think it felt really positive. There's just some of the images of the the different media we were using, and I suppose it gives a glance to some of the creativity that went on, and we piggybacked onto other events or other initiatives that were happening around the town in order to get that best coverage. Thanks, Linda. And so, from that, the content that we had, there was a real consensus across the board, which was good. The real focus on town centre vibrancy. Chesterfield is doing not bad as a town centre. However, there's a lot of quite low value use within there, and some of the residential development that's happening is again quite low value. So as well, so there is a worry about the town centre falling away a little bit. We were really lucky. We had some levelling up funding a couple of years ago as well. So we got 20 million from the government. So 10 million of that was for public realm improvements across the town centre. So that was really useful. And 10 million went towards a theatre and museum sort of like reconfiguration that we were doing. And you can see the priorities here that there were high streets, heritage, regeneration. So these were the main things within those areas that we picked, making use of empty units, town centre living, something really about animation. Because while we had public realm, what we don't want is people to visit our town centre, look at the public realm and think, oh, that's nice, and then not come back because nothing's happening. So it is really important to get that animation and that program of events going, which is something we're looking at and working on and expanding to hit different demographics as well, and an enhanced experience. And you'll see that when I talk about some of the projects at the end. And safety and security, although the council and the place had invested within the town centre anyway, there was certainly some good ideas that came out of the different conversations that we had around collaboration and prevention, and something about I suppose just the feeling of safety within the town centre. For instance, the public realm program we're doing, the lighting that comes with that, gives us more control over the lighting in the town centre, and it's amazing what kind of difference that makes. And then finally, transport connectivity, that enhanced experience again. So there's a bit of a message there, isn't there? And also connections to the centre and active and sustainable travel as well, and better use of digital. Thank you, Linda. So the successor programme was confirmed at the budget in October 24 and the details published in 25. So we had to wait quite a while for an update on where we were. And as we say, we had to keep the board interested and engaged in what we were doing. So certainly some changes, as has been highlighted by OJ, in terms of neighbourhoods rather than towns, a much wider policy menu. But some of the key elements remained, led by the partnership board, engagement critical, still a 10-year fund, still capital at 75%. And it talked about powers as well as funding. However, when you look at the list of powers, a lot of them were already existing ones, so well-being powers, something about respect orders, something about assets of community value, design codes, bids. All of these were probably already existing. So some tweaking, around CPO and the high street auction. So we certainly saw some tweaking to powers, but was there enough in that, or has there been enough, or will there be more? Is a question we're asking at the moment. Thanks, Linda. So as you said, OJ, the new program is definitely draws inspiration from the New Deal for communities, which was quite successful, and the neighbourhood renewal programs of the previous Labour administrations. And the guidance that we got said that areas should build on previous work and governance, although the scope of the new program is wider. That's quite important, that statement that they've got there. They should build on previous work, and I'll come back to that. But it was about thriving places, and you're right, it widened out the geography, but in itself that carried risks. So Linda, thank you. Neighbourhood boards need to be established, or we already had one. I think one of the clear messages that we got was, we don't want to undo work already undertaken. So to your question, OJ, around is it too late? A lot of places, I think, decided, from conversations we've had, that it was too late, that they'd already moved so far on that actually they weren't going to change a lot of what they did. And it said, incumbent chairs can be retained. In terms of the makeup of our board, probably the only addition that we probably want to do would be around the mayoral combined authority, which I don't think was in the first place. Although we had the police commissioner, we didn't have the mayor in, so that's something a bit different. But that wider scope does lead to potentially wider expectations among stakeholders and communities. It was interesting that when the program was announced, we did get a flurry of calls from people wanting to be involved in a different way, or wanting to take the program in a different way. So trying to meet those expectations, I think we decided we'd probably risk losing focus and also being less able to make an impact on quite a limited funding pot, especially around revenue. And so, they doubled the list of interventions. So if you added up pounds per intervention, you felt actually you wouldn't get very good value out of the money that you did have. I've mentioned the funding being at odds with the type of intervention promoted already. The board would need to be realigned if we sought to invest in a wider range of policy areas, was the thought. And starting again, it would actually take significant time and energy. And I think, it would also have a very negative impact on that board that are put together and some of the engagement work that we'd already do. And it would also mean that we were less likely to be able to make use of that funding from April 26. So the different options: could start again. This is what we put to board. Could start again with engagement. We could widen out beyond the town centre to consider funding interventions in other parts of the borough, especially those areas that were struggling, and that was a real question for us. A new board could be brought together, but we'd have to undo the progress made today and the consensus that was built on quite a wide and successful engagement. And so, we were still leading towards town centre vibrancy in a lot of ways, given that it's such a focus for our communities as well. Thank you, Linda. So we were told we can retain current priorities, providing they align with the new framework. So there was a bit of assessment to be done there. And, what we found is the significant engagement that we'd undertaken provided a strong rationale for us able to undertake that assessment. And when we did the work, the board's priorities that we had and the projects currently under consideration, we thought already had the potential to align well with many of the policy areas. And if you looked at a couple of the case studies that were put out by government, they matched projects that we were considering for Chesterfield at that time as well. And there was an opportunity, I think, of what we have done to drive even closer alignment and ensure further engagement with stakeholders. So we took those projects, and when we'd done the assessment, we thought, well, how can we strengthen these projects to meet some of the some of the scope that had been talked about in the program. So there was some good conversations out of that. So in short, build on work today, including the quite successful engagement that we have, maintain the existing priorities and board, build on that momentum, and take the money that OJ talked about in terms of that $250,000 to start investing in project development, so that once the program begins in earnest in April 26, we're ready to kind of hit the ground running with some of our capital projects as well. Thank you, Linda. So just in terms of potential projects, if you come to Chesterfield, and Chesterfield's, it's well known for its crooked spire, but there's no interpretation. There's no interpretation of why the spire is like that, or even how it got there, other than a small area within the church. So certainly the spire experience, which also drew on other sort of like heritage stories, was a project that we've got down for bringing forward in terms of one of our older buildings. We're looking at a community hub. We don't have a very large community hub in the town centre at the moment, so working with different community groups to bring something forward in the town centre, potentially, in some of the empty units in one of our shopping centres, which I think is really good. And with that community hub, I think also alongside further down, that creative space, we do have something called Junction Arts, so are quite successful in terms of some of the creative stuff around the Chesterfield area, but they're not really based in the town with much purchase, I suppose, really. So giving them some sort of better space would be really useful, especially since that's, perhaps alongside one of our new residential areas. And so there's that opportunity to create a residential area that has a little bit of focus around that creative space, and also around Stevenson Memorial Hall, which is the theatre and the museum. So, using some of these projects wider as well. Certainly tackling empty units, we perform quite well against the national average, but like I'm saying, some of those uses that we do have are quite poor value, quite strong in terms of independence, but still some empty units as some of the major players have moved out of the town. And also something about different services coming in. So talking to the hospital about, the use of certain elements within the town centre to provide more footfall, but also better access for communities. So, going back to, the plan for neighbourhoods, at the moment, in order to visit Chesterfield Hospital, you have to come into the town, get a bus out of the town, up to the hospital, and you've probably had to get a different bus in. So it's not very accessible. Whereas if we were to bring some of those services into the town centre, you could see that it would work both for the town centre, but also for people in terms of accessing those. It's a very quick run through, OJ. I mean, we're quite happy to take any questions. So from us, I suppose in summary, you can see that we felt that a lot of what we were doing could quite easily, transform to the plan for neighbourhoods. A little bit of tweaking in terms of some of the projects and maybe the board, but I actually felt quite confident that what we were doing was for neighbourhoods and for the town centre in terms of our approach.
Neil, that is really, really useful, really insightful. There's lots of chat going on in the chat box as well, and I think some of that I want to bring on to the call in a second. But first, Neil, I think just a few things for us to touch on. There's so much you brought up, which some of it I'm not surprised by. Some of it I hadn't really given proper consideration before until you'd brought it up. So things like one of the reasons, the rationale for not wanting to change the regeneration plan too much is simply because while it's great to have the additional flexibility, it's great to have the broader scope, the concern about the additional expectations that comes with, and especially when you've already done a lot of consultation and you've outlined some of the things the money can be
Mm.
spent on, it might be now that that commitment doesn't go away. So if we're talking about a broader scope, a wider policy menu to choose from, then all
Mm.
you're looking at is a dilution of those funds across a broader area. And then you start to consider how impactful those interventions will then be. Is that really part of the
No,
thinking why
I think
it
that's
just made
absolutely,
sense to
yeah,
stay on
yeah.
course?
I think that's absolutely right. I think, if we'd gone back, it would have been chaos for a start. I think if we decided to redo a program, we'd already submitted something. So, we were fairly mature in terms of where our plans were, and that had been based on really wide consultation, with a group of different, you know, groups from the demographic that we have in Chesterfield. So I think um, we would almost be counterproductive in terms of doing that. I mean, there are people who quite rightly would feel as though now they had a community project that should be considered as part of this. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't do that because, while we've got that first 3 or 4 years, in terms of what the program probably looks like, there is another 6 years beyond that. So, we have time to develop a program that can take in some of their ideas as well. I don't know if Linda, you want to add anything to what I've said there.
I think, OJ, the new interventions and the sort of spirit around communities and supporting communities to have a voice are all revenue sounding things. So, whilst welcome and probably needed, it just makes the whole conundrum of the capital revenue split more difficult, to be fair. I think the view we took was if we've got a healthy town centre and a community hub that's accessible to all, and we're bringing services in that will benefit everybody in Chesterfield, then we will tackle by default some of the issues, that challenge our most vulnerable residents, while still supporting our town centre, which still needs that TLC, that footfall, that repurposing. So we've tried to tick all the boxes we can within the scope of the programme, if we're honest. So the exercise Neil mentioned, where we looked at what we were doing, we kind of looked at which theme it came up under the long-term plan for towns programme, but then we meshed it against the plan for neighbourhood new priorities. And then I think the key will be delivery, trying to capture as many of those things as possible. So when you're looking at the community hub, what services do you deliver from there that are from that menu, that has now got bigger, as an example?
Mm. A really, really good point. Really good point. And I know we touched on this before in our pre-meeting, and I wonder how much this is the same for other areas, because the original program was about town centres, and ultimately the town centre is the focal point for any town or community anyway. By remaining focused on the town centre, it is probably the one place where most people are going to get the greatest amount of benefit in terms of its improvement. So it almost doesn't matter that the scope of the program has been broadened. That focus on the town centre can support everyone. Or at least it's the one location which you can get the most benefit out of for all.
Yeah, because if you read, OJ, the alternative, and going back to NDC, because I did some work on the one in Nottingham and did some evaluation of New Deal for the communities back then. It's an estate renewal program, or an area-based regeneration program that tackles one community in one area. And that would mean the rest of Chesterfield and the town centre wouldn't benefit. So this way, we're trying to bring those principles in to share the benefit with as many people as possible.
Yeah.
It makes perfect sense. And I'm also interested to hear from the entire group as well. My gut feeling is there might be a split here. So for the likes of Chesterfield, and I remember Barnsley, who we had on a previous call as well, and Angus Council looking after Arbroath, all recipients of the funding, because you were so mature in terms of where you were in developing plans, developing boards. The uncertainty hasn't helped. And Neil, I note what you say about having to work hard to keep the board together during this long period of uncertainty. But if I remember from our last meeting, we also had, and there's some chat in the box now, those areas where that the support isn't there. So I'm thinking of some of the business associations chambers that are having to pick this up and lead on this, even though there isn't the same framework or infrastructure to support the work there. So they would have been further behind if
Yeah.
actually the pause then was more helpful than it was a hindrance, because it allowed some time to catch up. So that's an open question for different people from the group. And I think, Howard Martin, I will bring you in soon actually to talk about your different perspective, because I do think that's really useful to understand. Neil, I just want to ask you, what types of things did you um, work on, and Linda as well? What type of things did you work on to try and keep your board active and involved and ready to go while there was the sort of period of the few months of silence?
I mean, we had different presentations from different groups, so we tried to get underneath the context a little bit more of Chesterfield as a place. I mean, it was interesting through COVID, we learned a lot more about our town centre than we'd ever known, and I think this gave us an opportunity to take that on to another step. And different groups came in. We had some school group that came in. We had the highway authority coming in, trying to do some meetings around transport and visits as well. So I think it was that keeping them active and just keeping them warm, I suppose. And some of them had their own ideas, and so we started to explore some of those, so they felt a bit more responded to, I suppose, in terms of the conversation.
Right, really useful, really useful.
Can I just add, OJ,
Yeah,
that
go for it.
in doing so, you started off by talking about the short-termism of funding for town centres. And when we were sort of training the board a little bit into that as well, as part of their role to become decision makers on what to do with the new money. So a lot of the town centre interventions post-COVID around ASB were funded by UKSPF. And of course, for much of last year, we didn't know what was happening with UKSPF funding. So when we were sort of bringing people in and presenting, we were trying to make it clear where resources were finite, how things were funded, how the town centre worked, so that they had one eye on, I suppose, as accountable body, when we go to them in 12 months' time to say, those PCSOs that we've got in town that were helping to deal with this issue you heard about, well, after March, they might not be here. And if you value that, that might still be a focus that you want to consider. So it was a little bit of a training session as well, Neil, wasn't it? In terms of
Yeah,
sharing
I
how
think
things
so.
work.
And the co-creation as well, wasn't it?
Yeah.
It wasn't one person or one group that was suggesting how these projects should develop. There definitely was a wider conversation on that, which is really useful.
Yeah, that sounds like it was time well spent for me. And Linda, just to confirm as well, so this is something I hadn't picked up, is M8CLG have been explicit that in terms of the submission of the regeneration plans, they are explicitly not going with a specific deadline, just to help manage the workload from their end in terms
Yeah.
of going through the plan
Yeah.
and being able to respond to various towns.
Yeah, I think that they've said to us on a call, submit whenever you're ready. That'll give them more time to look at them and be able to respond quicker, but you still can't start work till the following financial year.
Okay. And given we do have so many areas at sort of different stages in terms of the development of this, and that probably makes sense. That probably makes sense rather than having one deadline for everyone. So maybe
Yeah.
having that flexibility is helpful. Howard, can I bring you in? Do you want to just remind people about Bexhill Chamber of Commerce, where you're at, and some of the specific challenges that face you, which might also be replicated amongst those others who are leading business associations and probably don't have the support of a local authority behind them in this?
I want to try to explain. Sorry, my name's Howard Martin. I'm president of Bexhill Chamber of Commerce and Tourism. And although we have a private sector accountant as chair who is doing an excellent job, particularly with the changes in the terms of reference that seem to have come about, we're very concerned that businesses are being marginalised. And there's a lot of, to put it politely, distrust of the way that the boards are structured, where and I'm explaining from a business perspective, some of you might find this disconcerting or in some ways possibly even offensive, but we don't intend to be. We want to create an area where businesses actually do have a say and an understanding, because I think it's often when you get social sector and local authority sector together, it forms a sort of interdependency. They're reliant upon each other to deliver outputs, as you say, and half of the room, very often when it's the social sector, is reliant on the other half of the room for their salaries, which doesn't occur when you've got the private sector well represented in the room, because what you have, if you've got the private sector, the business sector represented in the room, is people who actually invest their own money in similar outputs. They create jobs, they create investment, they renovate the town, they put that in, but it's their own money. So there's always a little bit of friction. And I think that needs some clarity, because what we see and hear, and I'm going to give you a very quick example. What we see and hear is what we call on the outside in the business community, the interdependence, just sitting there talking about their own ideological endpoints or their own, how they envision the town being, yet they're standing next to somebody who's just invested £1.5 million in his new restaurant. And they're going like, oh, we're going to spend 2 million a year. He's going, yeah, I've just spent that over 6 months refurbishing my restaurant. What's your problem, mate? I'm summarizing. And then we hit, because then what the private sector, there's some elements of the terms of reference that the local authority and social sector want, that of course we support, arts and culture, events and things like that. But we do struggle with things like bringing community hubs into town centres, which are business environments, because of it's you're saying the town centre's deprived, and you're focusing that deprivation in the town centre because of the services that a community hub can and does offer. So the restaurant next door might go, well, they're not my customers, I want these. And then we run into two issues we've had that we're working through, I hope, with the board, is we wanted the board to work with us. We don't have a business improvement district to bid, which I'm sure you all know is financed out of business rates, but costs is sustainable over a long term, is a proven methodology for town centre improvement, town centre management. We wanted to work with the board on putting together the business case for a business improvement district. They didn't feel it was their role to do that because of this, what we perceive to be an interdependency thing, that, okay, yeah, but businesses run that. Yeah, help us put it together, and business will take it off your hand, and it's sustainable, and it's long-term, and it's a proven thing. And the other area where events and everything else, Bexhill, not many people know. We know Chesterfield has the wonderful Crooked Spire. Not many people know that Bexhill-on-Sea is the birthplace of British motorsport. And we have a long, wonderful heritage of motorsport. But when we put forward proposals that would attract private investment to kickstart that, you do hit the ideological barrier against motorsport and all the other environmental issues. And we're trying to work that through. We've had offers from the people who run Formula One of support, but we've got to get that ball rolling and break that ideological barrier. So I think that is a summary, and the fact that I'm the only, other than Sarah from Chippenham, I believe, are there only really two business representatives in the room who are not employed by social sector or local authority sectors? I mean, I know some people in the room will run businesses, but are they actually representing the business sector? I don't know. Thank you very much for the time, OJ. I think that may have stimulated some discussion and debate, but thank you for the time. Really appreciate it.
No, that's really interesting. Thank you. Thanks for that, Howard. And you won't be the only one. So ATCM is a mix primarily of local authorities and also business improvement districts. So it will be those bid managers who will be the people who will, like you, represent a business community. However, that being said, because we're talking about the plan for neighbourhoods, a lot of the interest is largely going to come from local government for this one. So it's one of the meetings where you will find probably more people representing local government. And what you say, I think for most of us in this network, we are absolutely aware of exactly this issue. Because ATCM is a diverse mix of people from both public and private sector, these tensions come up all the time. It is primarily what we deal with. It is about bringing different people together because both have a role to play, but sometimes understanding that role is a big part of the challenge for us. And I think what you bring up is really about the importance and the challenge of that consultation piece, especially when it comes to local authorities, lead local authorities working with neighbourhood boards. I would be surprised if there wasn't a little bit of tension somewhere out there in most locations because of the different perspectives people are coming from. That is natural. Ultimately, the role of us, the role we have, is to try and make sure we get the right outcome for everyone. But that consultation is critical. It really is. So I'm grateful for that additional perspective because it is what we need. I know Owen came in on the chat box to give
Can I
some
just
advice, and I think something.
respond,
Oh yeah,
actually?
go for it, Neil. Yeah, go for it first.
Uh, I mean, that level of mistrust, almost, that Howard is having to work with, it's just horrifying to me, and it does require, quite a mindset change on the behalf of a local authority to make, their contribution work in terms of this. When you were describing it, I was thinking, well, we're sitting in these board meetings, and we're represented by private sector, by local authority, although not much in terms of local authority, if I'm honest, and then some part of the social sector. But everybody's talking with one voice, actually, in terms of trying to get something going for Chesterfield. So I've never had to experience, luckily, the kind of thing you're talking about there. I know you're talking from the private sector as opposed to, I'm coming from local government, but it is interesting that that you have that experience, and we just haven't had it at all.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm sure when we started, don't get me wrong, sorry, OJ, there would have been people coming around that board that would be thinking, oh, we know what's going to happen here. The local authority is going to take all the money for its projects and is going to control absolutely every part of the influencing and the spending of the money. But, we were really clear that really wasn't what we were doing. And so we were giving roles to others or supporting others in taking up that role rather than us necessarily doing it. We have had to put a lot of support in, but I think to get where we are, it's been absolutely worth it. So
yeah.
yeah, sorry, I just need, it just seemed alien to me what Howard was saying, but I'm sure there are others in the same boat.
It's a fair comment, and the relationship between business community and local government is different from area to area. I think we obviously within the ATCM network, we're going to be fairly blessed because we tend to have a strong representation of those in local government who actually are quite keenly aware of needs of their local businesses. Hence the reason why they're in the ATCM network. So these will be local authorities who are keen on town centre management, whose officers will often probably work more with their local business community than they will sometimes other officers in the local authority. So close is the relationship between them. And so across the ATCM network, we don't always see these tensions within our own local authority members, but we know from our bids whose local authorities are not part of the ATCM network, we do know those problems exist. They absolutely exist for those local authorities that do not necessarily have the ear of their local business community, the trust of their local business community. What Howard describes is something which we know exists in many other places. And in something like this, it becomes a real challenge when the lead local authority might be the one receiving the money, but it might be the neighbourhood board and the business community that has to have a really strong say in how that money is spent and what that regeneration plan looks like. It's a real challenge. It is a real challenge, but it's definitely worth bringing up.
Thank you.
And Owen, can I bring you in? Firstly, I know you probably got a contribution to make anyway, but also to explain what you'd put in the chat box about the role of the Secretariat as well, because I think that will be important for some people to understand.
Okay, yeah, well, I'll just introduce myself. So I'm a consultant. I'm sure there's a few of us on the call, but I've been working with Wrexham for several years before a long-term plan arrived on their city centre regeneration placemaking. And I think one point to make, and I don't know if this was Neil and Linda's experience in Pressfield, but the programme when it landed this time last year, or probably a little bit earlier than that, came to all local authorities as a surprise. There wasn't a bidding process, it wasn't an application process, and in the case of Wrexham Authority, the authority were completely and utterly overwhelmed by a new programme when they were busy working on many others as well. So it's, as a consultant, we've been involved to help them actually get a programme started. I'm sure many other local authorities had similar resource issues as well. But that's probably led also helpfully to kind of address one of the comments that Howard mentioned and Neil kind of backed up earlier, that I think the guidance, the body language of both long-term plan and plan for neighbourhoods is local authorities, you are being encouraged to let go. And Howard, I'm sure if you haven't, it's worth reading the prospectus, because you'll pick up many messages in there about encouraging local authorities to kind of delegate authority, allow local decision making, and there's some really ambitious statements in there around citizen, community-led change. And this is really big cultural shifts for some places. And what we found in Wrexham, because we have a first-class business leader as chair, and I think that's made a dramatic difference, because we've got 4 or 5 businesses represented, from employers through to small businesses, on the board, and actually the public third sector is equally in balance with that. So that's led to a very different type of board, which has been very kind of business focused. So Howard, might be worth looking at the guidance to see whether that balance feels right in the case of Bexhill. But certainly that's made a big difference. But and relating to the comment that you just asked me to reference, OJ, there's been a real call to action on all of the people who sit around the table. The local authority are pressured because of the amount of resource they potentially need to put into this. So everyone's been asked, what can you do to kind of drive the process forward, not in terms of just kind of being involved in things, but actually, can you act as the secretariat? Can you kind of go out to your constituency and do the engagement for us through your network, rather than officers or consultants having to do that as well? So we've actually found that has worked really well, because it's meant that board members actually feel like they're doing stuff, not just turning up to meetings. And in the case of Wrexham, we've got the local university, which is now acting as the secretariat. I think one of the biggest challenges, and it's kind of been referenced a couple of times, is about the funding. So again, the body language of the programme is make spending streamlined and easy to do, and let decision making rest with the boards. However, the local authority remains the accountable body. And in Wrexham, we've got a real tension here about a business-led or business mindset organisation, I would say, who's wanting to make quick decisions about spending money, and having to go through quite a laborious procurement process within the local authority because they're doing their job, but quite rightly in terms of managing that fund. So I know there's been lots of discussions with the UK government around to what extent those procurement rules can be adequately managed, and the new prospectus does actually hint that in time the government may actually grant future funding, say the £20 million, to a separate entity, community trust, whatever it is, rather than a local authority, which might streamline that funding and decision making. So it's really interesting. So in Wrexham, there's been a lot of focus on what we've described as citizens-led change. There's a real ambition within the board that Plan for Neighbourhoods is the reason the board was formed, but the board is actually more than just one government programme. It's been given the permission to think much broader than that. They're actually, spending as much time thinking about other regeneration, place developing issues and opportunities as much as the government programme, because they see that as the catalyst. They see the government £20 million as a starting point. In all reality, it won't touch the sides on its own in terms of regeneration. It needs to be matched with a range of other partners, and you've kind of got to give them more say and more control in all of this. So it's been a really interesting experience from my point of view. And certainly in my experience of working in regeneration for over 30 years, the real kind of golden elements of this is the long-term nature of it. I can't think of many regeneration programs with 10 years committed funding, the ability to borrow money against that endowment as well, which I think is really good in terms of fast-tracking ideas as well. The encouragement to kind of local authorities let go and kind of allow local decision-making to be driven through a new kind of multi-layered partnership board. All of those things have actually made this program, I think, really exciting. I think, in all fairness, my final comment would be, I think that under the new government, the civil servants are still trying to catch up with producing guidance and information. So like in Chesterfield, Wrexham submitted its plan back at the end of July last year. It doesn't want to have another year of meetings talking about plan making. It wants a year of doing stuff, but unfortunately, the funding that's available can't be spent on any projects. But we're trying to shape it in a way that we can actually make a difference to those project ideas that we want to develop in the near future. So come 1st of April next year, there are projects that are being given money to spend and get on with stuff, really. So that's really the ambition for the next 7 or 8 months, I think. So hopefully that was a helpful insight from Wrexham for you.
That's really, really helpful, Owen. And I absolutely agree what you say about the role of the boards and how for some this might not necessarily be just about Plan for Neighbourhoods anymore. I think there's still town centre partnerships out there which were created as a legacy of the Porter's Pilots funding how many years ago. Sometimes there can be a legacy to some of these things, and if I'm being honest, that would be quite ideal, because ATCM's always said that marriage between public and private sector, those partnerships at a local level, are critical to making a town centre work. So if some of these partnerships are formed on the back of this funding, but they see their role and the lifetime as these partnerships as going beyond the Plan for Neighbourhoods, then I think that's probably a good thing. And I can see sometime in the near future as well, the government preferring to provide money to those areas where that partnership capacity is already there on the ground. So I do think that there are challenges, as we've heard from Howard, that there's always going to be challenges and tensions in terms of getting things up and running, and that clash of cultures between public and private sector is always going to be an element of that. But we've all got to start somewhere. And I think if it gets us to a better place in terms of local partnership capacity, then I think it's a good thing. And a question for you, Owen, as well, before I move on to someone else. I do note that for Wales, there is, and other devolved nations, there is the additional encouragement of being able to pivot regeneration plans to align more with the policies of devolved nations. Similar to Chesterfield, was Wrexham already too far down the line to really be able to make any substantial changes? Or were the original plans already fairly aligned to things like transforming towns funding anyway? Or have you taken the time to be able to take a step back and actually make some quite significant changes in terms of the plans coming forward?
Well, in the case of Wrexham, we'd been involved and had completed probably 12 months earlier a city centre kind of regeneration plan or placemaking plan, as they're called in Wales. So long-term plan was seen actually more about delivering of that plan. And although it was also an opportunity to probably strengthen the partnership around a plan, as I've kind of already explained, I think those are kind of the two gains from the programme: strengthening partnership and partners' involvement, and actually having a kind of a catalytic fund over the long term that could drive forward some of that change. I think under plan for neighbourhoods, there is a taking stock moment, and actually one of the challenges in Wrexham, and I'm sure it's the same in other places as well, is kind of the look and feel and the performance of the town centre is a reflection of the kind of the living standards and the prosperity of the communities that live around it. So what's really interesting about this programme is it's actually saying, you know, the changes that communities can see where they live is actually going to be reflected in their town centre. So there's obviously a sense of trying to kind of, you know, see to what extent a programme can help to regenerate communities that will lead to prosperity, that will then lead to spending in the town centre. Although, as I've already said, £20 million doesn't go anywhere near touching the sides on that. But you can make differences. And the example Linda mentioned about, you know, bringing services close to the centre, that will have some benefits in both communities as well as the city centre. So those are the kind of the areas that we're thinking that we just need to kind of properly stress test over the next few months, see if there's any health authority or other kind of public third sector agency that we can bring into the centre of the city that we hadn't really thought about this time last year.
Oh, that's really useful. It's really useful to understand. Thank you for that. Gillian, can I bring you in? Are you still on the call? It would be really good to get a sense check in Northern Ireland as well.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Yeah, fab. So, how have things changed for you guys? I mean, and I know how important the funding is, given the disruption we've had in Northern Ireland over the past couple of years with challenges around Stormont, etc. So, how is it for you?
Well, we were actually quite surprised to get it. Derry, Londonderry and ourselves were nominated in the 24 budget. And we were really just at the very early stages of pulling together a board whenever we had to pause. So what was decided when the new guidance came out, we paused for 2 or 3 months, was the group decided that we would keep the board that we'd pulled together and keep the name as well. We were calling it the Korean Future Town Fund rather than the town plan or plan for neighbourhoods. We have had plans for neighbourhoods basically in the last Labour government as well. I think one of the examples was put into the documentation in relation to Korean. And one of the key things, and this is me personally speaking, I have to remember I'm a member of the local authority, but this is my personal opinion that I'm talking about now, in that I was very keen that we looked at the centre of the town. There's been an awful lot of funding in the communities surrounding the town. This is a Northern Ireland thing leading back to the Troubles. We were looking at segregated communities, trying to bring them together, but there was never actually a fund for the jam in the middle, as we would call it, of the donut. So I was very, very excited that this new fund was going to give us some mechanism to make that jam, to bring everybody back into the middle again, to have our services, etc. So whenever the new plan came out and they talked about, oh, you could change the boundary, the terminology changed to neighbourhoods, there was that little bit of fear of, okay, are those neighbourhoods going to suck up a lot of the funding? Because as Owen has already pointed out, 20 million isn't an awful lot over 10 years to make significant difference. So we're still keeping the 3 headings of the themes. And we do have an independent chair from the university, the local university. The council is still acting as a secretariat. And in terms of project development, we've brought in an organisation within Northern Ireland called the Strategic Investment Board. So that's sort of more of the independent side coming in and looking at the themes, developing the board. And we're now really just about to kick off the consultation process in terms of getting a plan pulled together. And again, when we looked at when it was increased from 4 to 8 different interventions that could be covered, again, we thought that's going to dilute everything, but we're still at the very early stages, OJ, to be honest. And I was interested about what somebody said, I can't remember who said it, about building that capacity within the board to actually make good decisions. Yes, I think we have a very strong board in place in terms of people have lots of experience of place management, but we're now starting to get the community, the youth, and that element coming into this project as well. So that capacity building to make good decisions. Yeah, you can do capacity building to make decisions, but to make good decisions is going to be the hardest part of all. And again, based on what we've been told, yes, there is no definite date. So we're aiming to have a plan ready by December. And then given time to start to do a little bit of prep work so we can hit the ground running in April 26. So hope that answers Northern Ireland. And as well, we only just got our new programme for government, so that's fresh as well. So
yeah, it's all happening at last.
Yeah.
No, it's good. I think lots of programme for governments hitting. So I think we've got Scotland next week. So yeah, that's really useful. Thanks a lot, Gillian. There's so much information on the chat boxes. I'll be honest, guys, I've lost track. There's too much good information on here. I think what I'm going to do is, Julie Holden, can I bring you in? You made a comment about great community hubs as examples of best practice, which others can look at as part of the program. So that would be really interesting to hear a little bit more about.
Yeah, sure. Can everybody hear me okay? Yeah. So the one that I've put in the chat is for Colville CAN. So CAN stands for Communities and Neighbours. It's actually quite an interesting model because it's a cooperative, and the team behind it are actually purchasing the building, and they're running a fundraising round. They're selling bonds or shares or something. They did manage to secure some lottery funding. They've had a really generous landlord that's given them a heap of rent-free time with a kind of a plan that they will be able to fund sustainably going forward. But what they've done with that community hub is they've brought in all manner of different services, but they're kind of adding a lot of value into the town centre as well, because it's right on the edge of the town centre. So they're providing services, they're employing people that are kind of basically unemployable. They're giving them roles, they're supporting them. They're dealing with a lot of difficulties, but they're managing to do that in very much an environment that people don't feel embarrassed to turn up and go into. They've added into that a maker space. So they're supporting, I think, about 35 local crafters, makers. So they've got a really high quality retail space as part of, in fact, that's the kind of the forward facing part of the community hub. Is it's got a really high quality feel to it, but you can go through the doors and get some very personal private help. You can be open about any issues that you may have. They can access support for sort of lunch clubs and all manner of different things, but it's all kind of one step removed from what you see at the outer edges. So I would really encourage anybody to have a look at the link that I've shared, and if you want a connection, I'd be very happy to put you in touch with Dina, who's the driving force of that project. From a personal point of view, I've actually ran a couple of things there personally. I set up a community interest company to teach young people to sew, but it ended up being not just young people that wanted to sew, but ladies of a certain age that got made to feel like they couldn't sew when they were at school, and they've sort of come back in and started to do a few bits. So yeah, that then gets a little bit of the circular economy going, because they can set up make a kind of a repair cafe that's been set up as one of the things too. So yeah, so it's a really fantastic community asset. Thanks, OJ.
That's really useful, Julie. Thank you very much.
No worries.
I think, is there anybody else that's got any burning questions, anything they'd like to say before I let you all go for a nice sunny Thursday? Are we all content? I think we're all content. I think there's a lot of really useful information there. Because this is going to be ongoing for some time, ATCM will continue to host meetings on the plan for neighbourhoods, so we can check in, see how regeneration plans are developing, see how things have gone in terms of neighbourhood boards. That relationship between public and private sector as well, really important. We did promise under the long-term plan for towns that we were going to get a tile set up on Basecamp for members, so people would be able to speak to each other specifically on this. Now that things are moving again, we will do that for the plan for neighbourhoods. So that will be set up, and we'll make sure the right documentation is on there for everybody as well. Do remember, for those who are in the middle of this that need additional support, some of our members who are consultants are there to help you and support you where they can. Just to give you a heads up as well, so GennaCon, I've put this in the chat box, GennaCon will be hosting a meeting on Plan for Neighbourhoods on the 16th of May. So do reach out to Lauren G. I've put her email in the chat box if anybody wants more information, and others as well, likes of Owen and Julie, there to support you if you need that help. They're, as you can see, they're really knowledgeable. They all know their stuff, and they're there to help. Right, guys, without further ado, I feel like it's been a really interesting, really useful discussion. Thanks for everybody's contributions in the chat box. Really useful. I'll be reaching out to some of you who might need additional help as well. So especially those business associations. So Howard and Sandy, happy to support where we can. I hope you all enjoy some sunshine, get a little tan. Get the chance to work outside for the rest of the day. Gillani's shaking her head. No chance.
No, it's cloudy here.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. Oh, sorry, not sorry. Guys, have fun, and I'll speak to you all soon.